Okay. It said an error occurred, but now it says it's not saying an error occurred. So I believe we are now live on all the platforms on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and various Facebook pages, including the Facebook page of Cable Community Radio here in Portland, Oregon, as well as Popular Resistance and Song News Network, as well as my own pages. And this will go out as a podcast afterwards if you look for This Week with David Rovix, wherever you get your podcasts. And I'm very excited to be spending the hour with one of my very favorite songwriters and who will quickly become one of your very favorite songwriters if you like topical music and you look her up, Linda Allen. And with no further ado, it's great to have you here, Linda. And
Thanks, David.
I introduced you on my little missive that I sent out describing this broadcast. I introduced you sort of hopefully not disrespectfully as one of the greatest songwriters that you've probably never heard of, because I mean you know. I like to think I'm maybe one of the best songwriters a lot of people have never heard of too. But man, you got 27 monthly listeners on Spotify, and yet you have 10 amazing albums on that platform, and you've put out many more albums. So just like anybody out there, if you use Spotify, which you probably do since you're using YouTube to watch this broadcast, amazing body of work out there on Spotify, and much more beyond that. But I just want to like put Linda Allen into a little bit of context in terms of my audience. Like when I first was getting into writing topical music, just writing songs in general, you were one of the first songwriters that I discovered living in Seattle. I think it might have been at the Folk Life Festival. Somehow or another, I came across your cassette, Washington. Was it Washington Stories? Was it called, or Washington?
Washington Notebook.
Washington Notebook, and what an amazing collection of topical songs about the history of different things that happened in Washington State, and that was just one of the first most mind blowing experiences of discovering topical music, along with hearing rebel voices covering other songs of yours, which was just, I mean, hearing them do Rosie the River Revisited, but that was another. I think that was the first song of yours that I ever heard, which is this just a stunningly amazing song. So I just that's Linda Allen. I mean, and you are. I mean, just in a nutshell. And I mean, so I want to get into where you came from and how you got into writing some of the best topical music that I've ever heard, and how and but it's a big subject, and luckily we have an hour to get into it. So can we start like at the beginning? Where did you grow up?
All around. I was military family, so born in Seattle, but then we moved all around the world and eventually settled back in the Northwest, which has always been my heart's desire and where my roots run deep. So there are about 3 generations that have lived in Washington State. So the history goes back a ways, but yeah,
Oh wow!
it's my home.
And I mean, I imagine living on military bases and traveling around the world. I mean, it fairly obviously must have informed your perspective and as a songwriter.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was my first experience of how privileged we are in this country to live in a place like Turkey. And I just have vivid memories. And I was pretty young then, but living on the border in El Paso, living in Turkey, in places where people did not live like my neighbors or people that I knew in terms of poverty. And just to be face to face with that level of poverty certainly lit a fire in me. That was that. Those were important experiences that I wish everybody could have.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And you've done a lot of writing about stuff happening all over the world, as well as very local history. And but in terms of the Washington State growing up 3 generations experience, that so does your family go back in Washington State to the what we grow up learning about as the pioneers here in the Northwest in the schools?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think it was probably my great great grandfather who was at ordering at the old soldiers' home as a war veteran, and so my family tended to come and then go away and then come and go away. So they weren't all born in the Northwest. I was probably the generation that was actually born here. But I've always been fascinated by history. And I think because I moved so much, when I moved back to Washington as a young woman and moved to Bellingham, which is my home, not Seattle, actually, I live in Bellingham, pregnant with my first child, I knew that I wanted to stay planted in one place. As an introverted kid, all that moving was a little hard on me. So I really wanted to have my children grow up in one town, one neighborhood, which we did. One's, dear friends all around. So that was important. But part of what would root me in a place was knowing something about the history of the people who had lived before. That was what grew the roots. So I launched into a project when I got into Bellingham and what was then what I would call the golden days of CETA. These were community projects, many arts projects that were funded by the government. And CETA, I can't remember what it stands for, but basically it was government grants for a variety of projects that people would create. And this was in the early 80s. And so I created a project around Washington history and digging up the songs and meeting the people who were the carriers of the songs in my own town and then in the larger neighborhood. So it became kind of this region around here, including some BC, and just meeting a lot of singers and songwriters and carriers of tradition and putting them together in a book. And later did other books that were collections of Northwest songs, and then creating my own songs as a way of adding to the tradition. But really, it was my way of going deep down into that well, into the river that connects us all. But for me, being able to know the history of place connected me to that place.
Isn't that something? When you know the history of a place, it just it's like another dimension of seeing around you, like the fourth dimension. It is really, it's the fourth dimension. It's the time dimension that you can see around you if you have the background, right? It's and in your own history, your own family. I mean, understanding yourself and your place in the world. Did understanding your own family history going back several generations like that? I mean, I imagine was that really quite a educational process in terms of understanding yourself. I mean, I imagine growing up on a military base, and you talk about your great grandfather. I'm guessing that all the males for several generations in your family were war veterans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And what's interesting, David, is I think it gave me some compassion for men in the military because these people also came back wounded. Certainly my father did, wounded emotionally and mentally. So a lot of compassion there. And then, of course, my generation it was part of Vietnam. So while I was very much an activist and I was living in Berkeley, and at the same time, I went on several USO tours because I wanted to be a witness to what was going on there. It was totally against the war. But they accepted me anyway into the USO shows. And so I went to places in Vietnam as a witness that other people who were fighting the war in the way that I was not able to go.
Wow,
and those were powerful experiences for me.
Oh, please, can you tell us about the USO tour? I mean, I'm just, first of all, so you were playing music back in the 60s? Although
yes.
Your first album. Okay, so I'm just completely out of the loop. I just assume everything started with my discovery of it. But and also my really inadequate research and finding your earliest album is 1982. But were you recording albums prior to 1982?
No, I wasn't recording albums, but I started I count my professional beginning in 1969. I graduated in 68. Went on to become a school teacher. I went through school at Pacific Lutheran in Tacoma.
Oh, cool.
Went off to be a school teacher, and that did not last through my first year. I went off to Minnesota to teach, and halfway through the year, it was like, I love these kids. I love what I'm doing, sort of, but this is not my path. And I left school teaching not having a clue what was coming next, and found myself pretty soon in the Bay Area and taking different kinds of jobs, and at the same time starting to sing out, which was, I mean, I'm very much an introvert. I'm a very shy person, and those first times of being on a stage were terrifying. I thought, what am I doing? But I started singing in, on stools, bar stools in a bar as part of their happy hour, just sort of learning my chops and developing material. And about that time, I was also part of a fairly progressive church communities in Berkeley. So we were involved in the sanctuary movement. We were involved in a lot of political action. And
was this in the 80s, or what was this? It was called the sanctuary movement?
Oh, no, we're talking late, about 70, 71. Those are the years when
sanctuary movement, like what I mean, I know in the 80s I remember the terms people talking about the sanctuary movement, and they were talking about refugees from the wars in Central America.
That's right.
It meant the same thing in the 70s. Uh-huh.
It was kind of the second wave of it, because the first wave, and that movement too started in the Bay Area. I was in the right place at the right time for doing the work that I've come to do. But at that time, the first sanctuary movement was really about Vietnam War and giving sanctuary to soldiers in the churches. And it was a powerful movement. And it happened to be our church was right in the center of it. So those were monumental experiences and discussions, and it was a lively, rich time to be living in the Bay Area. So that, after I left, that movement then did become sanctuary for refugees from Central America, which of course was happening up here too, but I don't think it wasn't, I mean, we were giving here in Bellingham, we were also offering sanctuary, but it was more in homes. It wasn't part of that particular movement. But yeah,
So
powerful things that shaped me.
Oh yeah, no doubt. What a century it was, huh? And what a century this is too. But you, how did you end up getting involved with the USO tours? I mean, I'm just like logistically, how did that end up? How does that work? And then I want to hear what it was like to go do those gigs.
Well, there was at that point within the movement, there was the FTA movement, and that was Jane Fonda and Holly Near was on that. I think tours that were going to Vietnam, but they never got to Vietnam. But they were setting up, and they were, actively working to educate soldiers about what was the feeling here back home, about what was going on there. I think was part of it. But as I said, they weren't being able to get into Vietnam, and I didn't realize this until I spent an evening with Holly Near, and we were talking about all this, and she said, "What you did, you got there. We didn't." So it was a privilege. The first tour was in Vietnam and Thailand. And so I was part of just a 2-person team. It would be me, little folk singer with a guitar on my shoulder, singing John Denver covers and whatever was popular at that time. And we'd be flown into the tiniest bases or onto an aircraft carrier, and I'd be singing for, it might have been 2 or 3 soldiers on a little remote island. And then because the Bob Hope show was the one that was getting the news, and they were, on the big military bases and huge crowds. And I wasn't that. We were the little ones. And also USO was not political. In fact, when I applied for it and I went to interview, and I said, I'm not supporting this war. And he said, you need to know that right up front. And he said, that's fine. As long as you are not political, on stage. He said, Bob Hope is our biggest money raiser, but he does not represent, he's pro-military. And he said, you're not expected to do that. You're expected to just entertain and remain a neutral stance. And that I could do, So I was able to go there. And then I would hear the pilots talking in the bars about their heat-seeking missiles kind of thing, or what they were using in the jungles. And I said, well, how do they know the difference between, a person and a cow or whatever? And he said, well, we can't actually, and then the next tour I went on was a hospital tour in Japan. And that's where I actually went in and sang for soldiers in the wards. And that was also equally powerful. But part of it was because I'd been somewhat educated back in Berkeley about white sulfur, different kinds of bombs, and then I would go there and I would actually observe from the air, these huge potholes or the defoliation of the forest, or I would see bombs that I thought weren't legal. We weren't supposed to be using that particular bomb, and here was a stockpile of them. And so these were all part of my education. And I think it's a little like when years later I went to Palestine and Israel, and I went on my own, but sort of under the wings of Holy Land Trust and different groups that were working for peace. And again, went as a witness and thought, wow, this is not the story. And this was in the 90s. It was like, this is not the story that I've been hearing about Israel and Palestine. And oh, look at what's happening. And I'm there with, was it Witness for Peace? Now I'm forgetting things. I am 75, by the way. I do forget.
Now you're allowed to start forgetting things, and you can blame it on your age. Yeah.
I know, it's so convenient. But anyway, when I went there, I think when I went to Vietnam, I did not come back with a way to share the story and what I'd seen. When I went to Palestine, which was the only other time I've gone into a war zone, into an occupation in the way that I saw in Palestine. And of course, now it's all over the news again, and the injustice is once again being highlighted about what's going on there. And again, I witnessed firsthand and heard the stories firsthand of what was happening there. And that time I came back with a lot of incredible pictures, some that had been given me by the Palestinian Child Art Center of children's art. And there's no more honest portrayal of war than children's art. And so I put together a slideshow, and that's when I was touring around and just showing people. I said, this is a story you may not know. This is my experience. I'm not saying, if you have gone with a Jewish organization and just visited Jerusalem and you may not have ever crossed the border and gone around the wall to see what was happening on the other side. So here's my experience. And I think it's the same thing I did with women's suffrage, and developed a show around the history, the women's history here. And of course, that's been a passion of mine for a long time. But it's like, let's go around the wall. Let's hear what the stories are on the other side of the wall. Because when I grew up in studying history in the 60s and 70s, Washington state history and national history, I heard almost nothing about the women's suffrage movement, one of our most important human rights, civil rights stories that we have not heard. And so it became a passion of mine.
Yeah, so many other things that you've written a lot of songs about, which also are completely written out of the history books. I mean, how many people who grew up in Seattle ever even heard of the Seattle General Strike of 1919, which is like one of the most iconic moments of labor history ever, right?
Right.
But I mean, there's so many other things like that, right? Of
no,
course,
but we heard about the Centralia Massacre. In the way that it was named, in the way that it was told, there was that little reference. But again, What I
Because
love
we're talking
about
about union people defending their labor, their union hall against attack by right wing
right,
vigilantes, armed right wing vigilantes, and then they
that's
shoot
right.
some of them,
But
and that
that was
becomes
called
a
a
massacre.
massacre.
But when they're killed, it's never a massacre, right? Yeah.
No. No, labor history, the story of women, these are the stories that don't get heard, but they're there in the folk music. They're there in the music. And that's why I think part of the reason I got into doing this is realizing the most important stories and unheard stories I learned were through folk music, traditional folk music, and then more contemporary folk music. I think that I came up in a really wonderful time in terms of the kind of music that was even being played on the radio, and Pete Seeger and all of these amazing writers. And that was where I learned a lot of history, the
Mm.
history that mattered. So
And then
again, the
even
story
some
is
of
told
them,
by the winners. You know?
yeah, and then of course, unless it's a yeah, good history like Howard Zinn or something. And Zinn, in the introduction to his People's History of the United States, mentions that the first time he heard about the Ludlow massacre was because of Woody Guthrie's song.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that was certainly true for me too.
And the writing songs about like if you travel to a place like Palestine and you see what the occupation looks like up close on the wall and everything else, then I mean I think everybody can agree that's probably the most powerful experience in terms of seeing it firsthand up close. But if you can't see something up close, then a song that can bring you there in a way that I don't know if there's any other forms of communication that are quite as effective in my, but of course I'm very biased as a fellow songwriter, but then writing songs about history, it's another matter. It's different, right? Because you can't actually go there.
That's right. That's right.
How
And
do you
that's why
try
the
to,
songs are so important, to bring that
and
perspective.
how do you know when you're writing a song about history that you're there enough to be writing a song about it? You know what I mean? That you've transported yourself enough to the time and place to be, sort of speaking for people in a sense. Because that's, I mean, whether you want to or not, that's what you're kind of doing.
You're kind of breaking up. I'm having a hard time
Mm.
hearing it. It may be my poor reception. I'm not sure, but you might, if there was a question there, you might try again.
Yeah, I'll try again. When I don't know what's happening with that. I'm hearing it too with the echo. But when you're writing a song about history, how do you know when you're there in the history well enough that you're ready to write about it?
I do a lot of research. I really do. I read. It's interesting to talk. We were going to talk about inspiration a little bit. And
Hmm.
my inspiration may come from an article in a history magazine, like the story I wrote about. Um, was it Helga Espy? Yeah, came from a one page in a Washington magazine. And then I started researching and eventually even connected with family members. And that was true of several songs. But the song I wrote about two early suffragists, Emma Smith DeVoe and May Arkwright Hutton, and eventually met relatives of both of them. But it took reading their biographies and autobiographies. It's reading historical documents. But sometimes all I have is a newspaper article. And I'm sure you do this too, David, all the time, a news story, and it's like it sparks something, and it's like I want this story to be heard more than just this newspaper article. This is an important story. I want to put it in a form that it goes deeper, than just reading something. When you can put it in a song, it has a way of going deeper and hitting an emotional chord where people might then be motivated to take some action. And so I think a good song can be a great motivator, and it can bring people together, of course, as we know, but it can also spur some action. And so with a lot of the writing, and why I love what I do, I love being given this task, is in the hopes that it will shed some light on something, some piece of history that we can bring right to the present and say, oh, this is still happening in a different form, but here it is. So let's see what we can do about bringing people together around this issue. You know, or if there's a rally coming up and you really want to contribute something, so you come up with a song, you know. Yeah.
And then sometimes if there's a rally coming up, a song about history can be the best song to write about something that's happening in the present.
That's right. Which will soon become part of history, you know, that then you're just part of the whole flow, you know, that you've managed to link this piece of history to something that's happening now. And that, you know, the link in the chain, you know, that's when I see all of the incredible writers who've gone before me that have influenced me. I'm proud to be just another link. And then I have daughters and a lot of other younger people that I know are carrying it on. And that is very exciting to me.
When you're writing a song and telling a story in a song, would you say there's a particular key to the process in terms of doing it well, or are there several different sort of approaches to doing it, or do you kind of take the same kind of, are there certain kind of guidelines that you're always following?
I find that most of the time I write the words first, and that it's not particularly unique, but there are a lot of people who first come up with a tune. For me, it's the story and getting the story right, getting the poetry right. And usually I have going in my head, I may have some kind of a tune to write too. But just getting edit, you know, just get it down to where I can tell the story with as few words as possible and as clear as possible. And for me, part of the process is trying it out on my husband or a few trusted friends and say, does this make sense to you? It made sense to me, but then I get locked into my own head, my own little world. It's like, am I actually communicating what I want to communicate? And so I keep the baby song safe, you know, and maybe share it with one or two people who will give me some trusted people to give me some feedback. And then I try it out in front of a group, you know, an audience, and say, well, did that work? Or I get a lot of puzzled stares. It's like, okay, well, back to the drawing board on that one. But yeah, I trust having other people in the process in terms of the writing. The tunes seem to come fairly easily more often than not. I think I just have a huge tune hoard in my head to draw from, and sometimes they're a little too familiar. And I realize maybe after I've recorded it, oh, that was the tune of an old hymn. I should have attributed it to that, but I didn't know that. So yeah, there are those kind of surprises.
Those kinds of things are kind of impossible to avoid, kind of inevitable. But your arrangements also on your albums are often, I mean, there's some solo a cappella stuff early on, but you're often working with a whole bunch of great musicians, particularly a fiddle player. I don't know if it's the same fiddle player you're often recording with, but you're
Yes.
working with some great string players, and that's
Oh my
you
gosh.
started working with great musicians early on, and just I mean, what can you talk about the process? Are you often working with the same group of musicians over the past 40 years?
There are a few, and I think from the very beginning, from the first album, I tapped a local musician. I think he lives now in Seattle, but Julian Smedley. And I said, I've never done this before. And he had never done this before. And I said, I need a producer. I need someone who has studio experience. And he turned out to be just brilliant. And he did things on the first two albums, particularly, that I just had to sit back and let him take the reins for a while, because it was like, are you kidding? Steel drums on this song, or a electric bass solo, really? And I just had to step back and from my sort of box of, fiddle, banjo, bass, guitar, just step back and let him play. And wow, it was wonderful. And so Julian's been on just about every project I've done because he's a brilliant studio musician, a great player, and it's been a wonderful collaborator. So he's one of the main ones. When I need a banjo, I always call on my friend Laura Smith because she's just right there, and a good friend. Other people, well, my daughters. Oh my gosh, my daughters are both wonderful musicians. They're both fine songwriters. They're both fine players. And so whenever I can, I pull them in to the studio to either support what I'm doing or harmonies, but also solo whenever I can pull them in. And that they've been very important from the time they were little. Washington Notebook, they're these little kids, 9 and 11 or so, and there they are. And they just went on to become, very strong musicians on their own.
I imagine the experience of doing Washington Notebook. I just, I mean, each song on the album, for which, and people have to go to your website and find this album because it's one of the ones that's not on Spotify, incidentally. But Washington Notebook, and the experience of researching and writing those songs, I imagine, brought you a lot closer to a lot of people in the state of Washington. I mean, that just, I can't, it must have been quite something.
And part of what I loved about that project is I really appreciate collaboration. And on that project, I was able to take a song and give it to some of the finest musicians in the state and just say, I'd like to hear how you would do this song. Here's my scratch copy. How would you do it? And oh my gosh, we just got coming back. I mean, I wrote all the songs. I probably sang lead on part of them, but the collaboration of having other people take your songs and do them is truly an honor. So I love that album for that reason, and also for all the experiences. This was a grant. It was, and so I felt well supported. I traveled all around the state to research and be there and meet musicians. It was a songwriter dream project. I just loved it.
Working with a grant, there must be a lot of people out there, songwriters who have never even tried to, or musicians, other artists who have never tried to deal with grants or who, the industry, if you can call it an industry, the arts, whatever, music, it's gone through so many changes over my lifetime and even more over your lifetime. Most recently, in the past 20 years, what they would characterized perhaps as industrial collapse. I mean, it's 20% the size of what it was 20 years ago in terms of like CDs and all that sort of, by that sort of measurement. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I guess I do know where I'm going. It's a long-winded question, but in Europe, they spend something like 100 times as much on the arts as we do in the United States. And I just wonder about how many challenges have been involved just in the process of trying to put out albums and do what you do.
Well, for me right now, it's a good thing I have another job. I'm a therapeutic musician with hospice, which is work I dearly love. And I'm launching into doing another project, but I don't expect to make any money out of it. I just hope to pay, because I have a GoFundMe campaign going now. I hope to get enough in to pay for the cost of paying musicians, because that's a first priority, and paying for the studio. I'll probably make it online because people aren't buying CDs anymore. I have closets full to testify to the fact that we put a lot into manufacturing CDs.
We got a shelf in my closet that's actually like bending from the weight of so many records on it over time. And I'm really like, the worst thing that could happen, if anything happens in my apartment, if you ever hear like, oh, David Rovix died in an accident, it's because like the closet like just like attacked us. That could happen happen any night, Yeah.
I can go you one better. I still have boxes of LPs.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about too. LPs. Yeah.
LPs and CDs and
LPs are heavy.
no, I think I look at my daughters trying to. Jen's working on her first recording. Kristen has a number out already, and just how discouraging it has been for them to try and raise the money while they're still trying to raise enough money to support themselves through other work. And then, of course, COVID was totally a disaster. One daughter was on the road and making her living in part that way. And all of a sudden, all of that ended. I mean, it ended for all of us. This has been a really, really tough time. So I'd really encourage everybody, if you're not already on board, go to online concerts, donate to people. Musicians really need it. And I think even statistically, when you look at people out of work, the arts industry has been particularly hard hit. So do what you can to support David, you have a Patreon. Don't you have a Patreon set up? So
Yep,
people
right
can support you that way. That's great. I'm not that organized, but I do have a donate button on my welcome page on my website, which is Linda Songs, LINDASONGS, and put the S at the other. There's another Linda Song who sometimes gets my donations.
Oh, no, because you do have the disadvantage of having a very common last name. That's I mean,
Yes,
that's a problem on the internet for musicians, isn't it? I mean, yeah, I never had that problem. From the very beginning, people look for me and they find me and maybe my dad, and that's about it. My sister, but.
Well, Alan is very, people sometimes call me Barbara, actually, because of the old folk song, Barbara Allen.
That doesn't help.
But anyway, lindasongs.com is my website, and that's also on that welcome page. There's also a link to the GoFundMe if people wanted to support the next recording project, which may take a while, but it'll get there.
But it used to be, I mean, just for the people who are like maybe under 40 and don't maybe never firsthand had this experience, it used to be that you'd actually record, you could actually record an album and you could know that in the next couple of years you'd certainly make the money back for the recording costs by selling the album at shows and stuff like that. That was the case for you for a long time as well, right?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. But I will say, grants have really been important over the years. Mm-hmm. There have been a number of them that I have had to really, hone my skills in the business end of this world, and to learn how to write a grant and apply for a grant. And sometimes it's paid off at really critical times. So I would encourage people to look at your local arts organizations and check out their due dates and take a class on grant writing. And it really can help.
Yeah, that's great advice. Although then if you have to apply for grants and all these other obstacles in the way of trying to make a living as a musician, then it just sort of ends up making a more and more sort of like a pool that gets honed down into those who are able to do all the grant writing and everything, right? It's interesting.
Well, and as you know, you are so far ahead of me, David, on social media. I just look at you in total awe, and I think, how do you do what you do and link up and then still have time to write as many songs as you do on topics? I'm in awe of what you're accomplishing.
Well, I don't have a day job, so that helps. Linda, you mentioned a few songs.
No, I didn't either for a long time.
You have a guitar nearby, and you might be able to do a couple of songs for us. There's also a few that you mentioned that are very topical. We were just hearing about the 20,000 children who are currently being held in prison-like conditions by that are supposed to not be prison-like conditions because the Democrats don't do that. So it has to. We have to call it something else. But would you do a couple songs for us?
Sure, I'm glad to. I was just deciding which ones. So This one, okay, this is probably, it's not as polished. I have to look at the words. I have to look at the words a lot anyway. Words drop. Remember stage. I think before that, I think I'm going to do I Choose, because Planned Parenthood and reproductive rights are a huge topic right now. So I'm gonna do the one I wrote called I Choose. So let me find it. Okay, here we go. Yeah, that's the one. Young girl in a parking lot, pushing through the screaming faces, staring at her blue shoelaces. She's at the clinic door, now they hear her roar. You don't get to choose, you who do not know my story. You don't get to choose. You will never own this body, what I hold and what I lose. I choose. Woman at the clinic door, facing the humiliation just to get some information. They tried to keep her out, now they hear her shout. You don't get to choose, you who do not know my story. You don't get to choose. You will never own this body, what I hold or what I lose. I choose. Now we're at the door, with our bodies and our voices. No one takes away our choices. Sing it loud and clear, so everyone can hear. You don't get to choose. Ooh, you don't get to choose. You do not know my story. You don't get to choose. You will never own this body, what I hold, what I lose. I choose. I choose. I choose. Okay.
Wow, that's really amazing. And the internet is exploding. There's a lot of other people who agree that's a fantastic song, and that's really a fantastic song. What else you got?
Wonderful. That's on the CD that came out just before COVID called Singing the News. The next one coming up is called After the Plague, 4 Paths Home. I think the next one I'll do, okay, how about Rosie the Riveter? Because you've mentioned that. And
First song I
let's
ever heard.
talk about women's history.
Yeah.
Which is a passion. Yeah, okay. Well, my mother was a Rosie the Riveter, and she worked at what's now Joint Base McCord, but it was Camp Lewis at the time. And it's called Rosie the Riveter Revisited. Oh, hold on just a second. What? Yeah. Oh, my daughter just walked in. Oh, hi, honey. She's been in California and she's just home. So let's do Where I Stand. Yeah? Okay. All right. So quick change. Jen, you want to peek in and say hi? Come over here and just say hi. So we're going to do a song together because this is one she knows. It's called Where I Stand. That's so fun. Jen, you walked in. What perfect timing. Okay, and I'm going to do Where I Stand, and it's going to then morph into I Believe That Peace Will Come. Okay, Jen, come sit. Here we go. This is Jennifer Allen Zito, my oldest. Here she is. And as I said, you'll hear her voice and her sisters all over my recordings. Woman standing in the rain on a cold October day. In her hand she held a sign that said there must be a better way. By her side her child asked, why do you do the things you do? Once you know I did it for me, now I'm doing it for you. So you will know where I stand. You will know who I am. You will know where I stand if it all falls down. Gray were the stones of the courthouse steps, and gray was the autumn sky. Gray were the faces of the passing people looking down as they walked by. Black and white was the news that morning in a world about to die. Red as blood was the sign above, and the child again asked why. So you will know where I stand. You will know who I am. You will know where I stand if it all falls down. If it all falls down. Used to be I believed I could change some hearts with a handmade sign. Now I know I gotta keep on so that others can change mine. Sometimes things have to fall apart to make way for something new. Hold a sign, hold a vision, I'm leaving it up to you. So you will know where I stand. You will know who I am. You will know where I stand if it all falls down. 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 I believe that peace will come. 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 I believe that hope survives. 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 We want to do Love Will Rise. I believe that 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 humankind. I believe in humankind. I believe in humankind. I believe in humankind. I believe that peace will come.
I believe
that peace will
I
come.
believe
I believe that peace will come. 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 Yay!
Fantastic. Wonderful.
Making room for Jen. You can scoot over a bit. I'm so glad
Yeah,
to see her.
plenty of room.
I haven't seen her in a
Plenty of room
year.
on the screen. Great. And would you mentioned something about the border as well? I don't know if that's in your current repertoire or anything else. Would you do another for us? I'm just too spellbound to talk anymore. Like you got another, Linda?
Which one did you say?
You mentioned
David,
the
I missed
border.
that.
You mentioned the
The
border
border.
and the kids in
Yes.
cages.
Yes. Oh, it's a hard one to sing, but I'm just recording it and working it out, but I think I can sing it enough. That was an emotional one to write. That's a hard subject. It's called, in my very poor Spanish, Mi querida hija, ¿dónde estás? That's the only Spanish in there, but it's my dear daughter, where are you?
There's a lot of songs.
Oh, Jen doesn't know this.
You got to do a few times before you can get through it without crying, isn't it? Oh, Jen, yeah, I didn't. And we can change the set list to include those amazing harmonies, but
Yeah, I hope I will get her on this one. But she doesn't know it yet. They say run, mija, run. Run for the border. They've taken your husband, your son, and your daughter. Our lives were in danger, so we ran for the border. Me and my daughter, to live among strangers. Mi querida hija, ¿dónde estás? Mi querida hija, ¿dónde estás? The journey was long, and we barely survived it. Half starved and exhausted, we finally arrived to the country of refuge for strong, willing hands. It was there at the border the rumors began. Mi querida hija, ¿dónde estás? Mi querida hija, ¿dónde estás? We were finally questioned, and they reached for my daughter. I'd heard rumors of cages, kids taken from mothers. Run, hija, run! Our lives were in danger, but they took her from me, these cold as ice strangers. Mi querida hija, ¿dónde estás? Mi querida hija, ¿dónde estás? He sent me away from that border. I go back every day to search for my daughter, but they've taken our children to live among strangers, but they can't tell me where. They've lost all the papers. Mi querida hija, ¿dónde estás? Mi querida hija, ¿dónde estás, mi querida hija? ¿Dónde estás, mi querida hija? ¿Dónde estás?
Absolutely fantastic. So honored to have that song on this broadcast. Wish that you had no reason to have written it, and wish there weren't 20,000 children currently being held by ICE. whose
Yeah.
parents are trying to find them. And you had this new album coming up. What's it called?
After the Plague. This is the working title. It could change, but After the Plague, Four Paths Home.
And are there many other songs related to just very recent developments in terms of the pandemic and such?
Well, the other one on here that seems to particularly important right now is one about homelessness. And it's just titled, I Live Under a Bridge.
Oh, can you do that for us? You got that in a
Sure.
playable form? Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, this is
And
another
speaking of which, if
quite new one.
anybody's listening from Portland, we're having on Memorial Day, on Monday, the 31st of May, we're having an event, Memorial Day at Kelly Butte, to remember all of those homeless and other indigent people taken off the streets of this city and sent to the prison at Kelly Butte to split rocks. That's how this city was paved for the first half of the 20th century. So hope to see their
Which I
Memorial Day at
learned from
Kelly
you,
Butte.
David. Which I learned from you. That's what a song will do. I live under a bridge. This here is my home. It's my freeway kingdom. This chair is my throne. Weather's mostly been fine. This tent pulls back the rain. Got a bottle of Jim Beam. Pulls back the pain. But oh, when the wind... Wait a minute, I'm not doing this right. Just a minute. I've got my timing wrong. Okay.
I've done that so many times.
Okay. Okay, I think I got it now.
Good. We need like an aperitif to clear the musical palette from the left.
Yes.
This is like a good boop. Okay.
As I said, this is a new one. I haven't done this 50 times. I live under a bridge. This here is my home. It's my freeway kingdom. This chair is my throne. Weather's mostly been fine. This tent pulls back the rain. Got a bottle of Jim Beam. Pulls back the pain. But oh, when the wind comes and oh, when the rain comes and oh, when the snow comes, and it does. I live under a bridge. Some folks think that's strange, but when I lost my job, life got rearranged. First I lost insurance, then the cash ran out. My landlord said it's crazy shit, then he kicked me out. And oh, when the car got towed, and oh, when the shelters closed, and oh, when the food runs low, and it does. I live under a bridge. There's a family here too. We could all be here a while. That kid's only 2. We're told we'll have to go, but no one's told us where. I can almost smell the foul smell of tear gas in the air. And I just lost the second page. This is live, folks. Oh, here it is. And oh, when the cops come, and oh, when the guns come, and Oh, when the pain comes, and it will. I live under a bridge. You know, it could be you. I can barely breathe now. What's an angry man to do? I never thought I'd be here, sick and weary to the bone. No dignity, no future, just endless nights alone. And oh, when the tears come, and oh, when the pain comes, and oh, when the fear comes, and it does. I live under a bridge.
Absolutely fantastic. And yeah, and people commenting, comments include the insurance runs out, car gets towed. I've literally lived this. Another comment, Linda is easily my favorite guest I think I've ever seen you have. And there's been a lot of other very positive comments. But yeah, gorgeous, gorgeous.
Well, I think just a word about that song is here in Bellingham. There are a number of homeless camps, and there are some, there's certainly some shelters available, but there are a lot of people who fall through the cracks. And for a while, as a protest, they set up a camp at City Hall, and it was there for a while. But what was terrible was when they decided to sweep the camp, and this has been ongoing. To sweep the camp meant that all the food, a lot of us have been cooking for the camp, the tents, the shelters, everything that had been put together, they came in a day earlier than they said they were coming, came armed to the hilt, came with, very militarized. And they just swept everyone's belongings, threw it in a dumpster. And that was that. I mean, intolerable to have this happening in our town and these kinds of sweeps. And they're continuing. My husband and I cooked for one of the camps that wound up way deep in the woods to try and avoid the sweeps. But people just aren't aware of what's been happening among the homeless and the people who are the most vulnerable.
Yep, and then there's just seems to be among the sort of those who are homeowners, or at least especially it's the ones who own multiple homes. I mean, the idea of a solution to this problem, as the cost of real estate has just risen more and more since the American Revolution, actually since before then. I mean, it's just been a feature of this country's history that as westward expansion, everything, the real estate just goes up and up, and there's limited amount of land, and the population grows, the real estate gets more and more expensive, and it's completely obviously unaffordable now, and they're still talking about solving the problem by building our way out of it, and it just doesn't seem. It's a very, very short-sighted. It's this idea that more real estate development is going to solve the problem is a little bit like, okay, we're not getting this pattern here. It seems fairly obviously a extremely limited scope of a solution, but I don't know. What is there any kind of movement that's really it's like speaking towards a real alternative to this pattern around Bellingham, or anything going on around that?
Well, I know there was many organizations band together to protest the sweeps and the way that they were happening. And they have several tiny homes, communities. They have another one that's being developed. I think, again, the tiny homes seems like a better solution, certainly, than putting everybody together in a shelter where a lot of the folks aren't really capable of handling that situation. So there are efforts, but the problem, as you know, has just ballooned. I've never seen the number of homeless on the streets. I mean, everywhere I go, and you just can't close your eyes to that.
And have you ever seen house
So
prices like this either?
no, 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 incredible. My kids, I don't know how my 3 adult children are ever going to buy into housing. It just feels impossible, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us for the hour. It's been just wonderful. And hope to see you in the real world sometime.
Thank you, David. I'm sure we will. So thanks for the good work you're doing. I'm deeply grateful for it. And thanks for the opportunity to be here. I've appreciated it.
My
It's
pleasure,
been
and it's
fun.
all very mutual. Take care,
Okay.
Linda.
Thanks, David.
And thanks so much, everybody, for joining this discussion with Linda Allen, lindasongs.com to find her music. And of course, as I mentioned, 10 amazing albums of hers are right there on Spotify. And she barely has any listeners on Spotify, so you should be one of them. Put her on a playlist. And I'm sorry about the technical issues with that echo and stuff like that. I can explain why that happened, and other things I can't explain, but it's some things are just unavoidable. And but hopefully that was all audible enough and even sounding good when I wasn't talking at the same time as she was, or at least when it didn't appear to be me doing that. There was a delay. If you didn't pick that up, there was about a 1 to 1.5 second delay throughout that whole conversation. So that's why it looked like I was interrupting her every time I spoke. This is a normal thing with media. Anyway, I don't know why I felt like pointing that out, but just for people that don't understand why these things happen, that's why. Okay, take care, everybody. I will hope to. I'll be back with more broadcasts and more interviews next week, and of course during the Memorial Day weekend, there's lots going on, including my Saturday concert on the last Saturday of the month here on the internet, 1 p.m. Pacific time, and then on Memorial Day for anybody in the Portland area, Memorial Day, May 31st, 1 p.m. at Kelly Butte. We'll be having a gathering there to uh, talk about people who split rocks there and sing songs about them and have a picnic and talk about abolishing evictions and stopping the sweeps and otherwise have a good time. And thanks for listening. You can find this in podcast form if you look for This Week with David Rovics wherever you get your podcasts. Bye for now. Remember, don't pay the rent unless you really have to. Trust your neighbors, and mutual aid will get us through.